Most people assume serial killers are obvious, that you'd sense something off immediately, that you'd know. But most people who knew them didn't. Neighbors called them quiet and polite. Coworkers described them as helpful. Some were married with children, coached Little League, attended church every Sunday. So what actually separates a serial killer from everyone else? The answer isn't what Hollywood tells you. It's far more psychological and far more disturbing. First, let's define what we're talking about. The FBI defines a serial killer as someone who commits 2 or more murders in separate events with a cooling off period between them. That cooling off period is key. It separates serial killers from spree or mass killers. They stop. They return to normal life. And then they do it again. That ability to return to normal, to go to work, have dinner, laugh at a joke, requires a psychological architecture that most humans simply don't have. The first major difference is in how their brain processes empathy. Brain imaging studies show that many serial killers have significantly reduced activity in the areas responsible for emotional empathy. This is the paralimbic system, the network connecting the amygdala, the orbital frontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex. In short, the circuitry of feeling what others feel. Now, here's what surprises most people. Many serial killers score very high on cognitive empathy, the ability to understand what someone is feeling without actually feeling it themselves. That's not compassion. That's a map. They know exactly what their victim is experiencing. They just don't care. In some cases, that knowledge is part of what they seek. The second major difference is in how they process fear. Most humans feel fear when they consider harming someone. It acts as a brake. Serial killers show dramatically reduced fear responses. Research by neuroscientist Kiehl using a mobile MRI scanner inside a prison found consistent structural differences in the paralimbic system across hundreds of psychopathic inmates. This doesn't mean they were born to kill, but it does mean their brain's natural deterrent system, the internal alarm that says, "Stop, this is wrong," fires differently. The third difference is their relationship with power and control. For most serial killers, the act of killing is not primarily about violence. It's about domination. FBI profiler John Douglas, who interviewed dozens of serial killers for the Behavioral Science Unit, found that the fantasy of total control over another person was a consistent core driver. Many reported feeling powerless in childhood, humiliated, invisible. The killing became a way to rewrite that script, to finally feel powerful in a world that had made them feel small. This is Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist at work. The PCL-R identifies traits like grandiosity, pathological lying, lack of remorse, and shallow affect. Most serial killers score very high on it. But psychopathy alone doesn't make a serial killer. Many psychopaths never commit violence at all. They become CEOs, surgeons, politicians. The psychopathy is a piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture. The MacDonald Triad, proposed in the 1960s, suggested 3 early warning signs in childhood: bedwetting past a certain age, animal cruelty, and fire setting. Later research complicated this picture. The triad has since been mostly debunked as a reliable predictor. But what researchers do consistently find is a history of profound childhood trauma, humiliation, and a complete failure of attachment. John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Rader all experienced severe psychological wounds in childhood, abandonment, abuse, shame that went unaddressed and calcified into something far darker. Researcher Ann Burgess, who co-designed the FBI's original criminal profiling methodology, identified what she called the motivational model. Trauma creates a feedback loop of violent fantasy. The child creates an internal fantasy world to escape real pain. Over time, that fantasy becomes darker, more detailed, and eventually, for some, the line between fantasy and action dissolves. This is why serial killers are often described as living in two worlds simultaneously. The outer world, ordinary, functional, sometimes even charming, and an inner world that nobody else can see. The fourth difference is fantasy itself. Serial killers often begin rehearsing the act in their imagination years, sometimes decades before the first killing. The act is never truly impulsive.
Ted Bundy described his fantasy life in chilling detail in interviews before his execution. He said the fantasy grew like a hunger that needed to be fed, and feeding it only made it grow. The fifth major difference is what's called the cooling-off period mentality. After a kill, many serial killers describe a feeling of relief, calm, even deflation. The fantasy was finally real. And then, the hunger returned. This cycle, fantasy, build-up, act, release, return, functions almost identically to an addiction cycle. Researchers like Dr. Joel Norris documented this in serial killer case studies extensively. So, are they born or made? This is the question that haunts criminology. And the honest answer from the research is both, and neither is enough on its own. The diathesis-stress model suggests that a biological predisposition, the reduced empathy, the fear processing differences, combined with severe environmental stress, produces the outcome we see. Think of it as a locked room. The neurology may provide the room, but it's the trauma, the neglect, the untreated psychological damage that closes the door and turns the key. Importantly, the vast majority of people with psychopathic traits, difficult childhoods, or reduced empathy never harm anyone. The pathway to serial violence is narrow and multi-layered. The sixth difference is their victim selection. It is rarely random. Serial killers typically have a type, often referred to by profilers as their victim signature. The signature reflects something psychological the killer is trying to achieve. Victims who resemble a person of significance from their past. People perceived as vulnerable or symbolic of something they resent. This is why profiling works. Not because killers are predictable robots, but because their psychology leaves a signature on every crime scene, every victim choice, every method. The seventh difference is their relationship with detection. Many serial killers are not trying to get caught, but some subconsciously are. They escalate, they taunt, they make contact. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, sent letters to police and media for years. He was eventually caught because he asked investigators if a floppy disk could be traced. They said no, it could. Psychologists believe this behavior reflects a need for recognition, a desire for the hidden inner world to finally be seen and acknowledged, even if that acknowledgement means capture. What's perhaps most unsettling is that serial killers are not alien beings from outside the human spectrum. They are on it, at an extreme end shaped by neurology, trauma, and failed intervention. Which means that what separates them from the rest of us is not simply a category. It's a series of biological, environmental, and psychological variables, any one of which, removed, might have changed everything. This is not an argument for sympathy. It's an argument for understanding. Because understanding is how we build better early detection, intervention programs, and mental health systems. The research of people like Hare, Kiehl, Douglas, and Burgess didn't just help catch killers. It helped us understand the outer limits of what the human mind is capable of becoming. And it reminded us that the most dangerous minds are often the ones that look the most like everyone else, until the moment they don't. The mask isn't worn to deceive. For many of them, by the time they reached adulthood, it had simply become the only face they knew how to show.
Understanding what makes a serial killer different doesn't make the darkness less dark, but it does mean we stop being surprised by the neighbor who seemed so normal. And that matters.